Hi, I'm Mike Ryan. Readers of Turquoise in America Part 2, 1910 to 1990, will be familiar with the name Alan Vauchal. Alan told his story in Chapter 5, First Contact, about his involvement in the introduction of Chinese turquoise to the U.S. market in the late 1980s. Alan contacted me recently, and he had been in contact with a Chinese turquoise dealer, Andy Wang, that's spelled W-A-N-G, and Andy had an update on some developments in the Chinese turquoise market. So I thought it would be fun to do an update on Chinese turquoise. And we're going to do this in two parts. The first part will be then, and the second part will be now. So with that, I'd like to start by reading a little bit of Alan's story from Chapter 5 of Turquoise in America Part 2. And if you haven't read that, I really encourage you to do so. It's really a fascinating story. Yunshan, translated as Cloud Prefecture, is a town on the Han River in the north of western Hubei. It is an ancient town previously known only for the two fossilized human crania found in caves along the cliffs beside the river. Until Xi'an was expanded during the Cold War, Yunshan was the population center of this area. It was the site of the old Chinese turquoise carving shop and the cutting shop we built in the 1980s as part of the export of Chinese turquoise. At the Yungai Temple Mine, Yungai, there are ancient temple ruins on the top of the same mountain that has been mined for hundreds, if not thousands, of years. Recently, I heard the mine name written called the Yungai Temple Mine. This was not a name used in the 1980s. It may have been the name of the mine in pre-revolution China, and it's now used again. Yunshan Mine is translated as Cloud Mountain Mine. I recently heard people in the United States use this name for the same mine. I never heard this name and believe someone recently applied it to the mine. It could also be a mistaken pronunciation of Yunxian, which would be the town. The mine used to be called the Yunxian Mine because it was part of the same work unit as the Yunxian carving shop. Depending on the ferry and the weather, it was about a 3 to 4 hour drive from Yunxian on a very poor road. Xi'an is the administrative center of this area. So, we can see a lot of confusion about that, and that's why I've always tried to call this mine the Yungai Temple Mine. So, these two parts of this update are really a story of the development from communism, because at the time of the late 80s, as you would read in Chapter 5 of Part 2, the China of that period was still very much under the influence and following all the patterns of the old communist regime, even though new capitalist elements were being introduced in the late 80s, and we've certainly seen that development over the succeeding years. But this story is a story of the development from communism to capitalism. If we start, I want to take a look at the location. Many people probably are not familiar exactly where this turquoise comes from. So here we have in this photo, a photo of China, and we see the marked Hubei, which is really just almost in the center, a little north central China. And that is the province, the Hubei province, where the turquoise is found. In the next photo, we see the miners. This is real interesting because Andy provided this, and this comes from 1978. So it really predates the involvement of Alan and Ron Alexander and Danny Lopacki in the late 80s. But we see here the mine workers, and they're getting fed their lunch. And you see they're wearing these straw hats. And Alan really points out that this is a very important photo because the term is the iron rice bowl. And that really referred to the communist concept and idea of taking care of everybody. There was really no independent ownership. There was no capitalist market. You were really sort of taken care of from cradle to grave, and you had your iron rice bowl. And certainly in this turquoise mine, the result of that is they would just dig, and there was no economic incentive. There was no profit involved. They just dig and just store the turquoise. They just kept digging. And that's one of the reasons why there was such a large amount of turquoise. So in the next photo, we see some mine cars. So they would be digging in this underground tunnels. They would take the mine cars, run the turquoise out on the rails into the storage area. And we see a photo here of the drilling that would take place before the blast. Because as I mentioned, with the iron rice bowl mentality, they would just dig, blast, finding as much turquoise as they could with no incentive for, because there was no market. There was no market to supply. So next photo, here we have Danny Lopacki, and he's standing here on this storage bay that is estimated to contain about 70 tons. And there were 3 of these. So we're talking about a lot of turquoise that was in storage in the late 80s when the story of First Contact takes place. The next photo, we see Danny bending over here, holding up some high-grade turquoise. And for those of you who have seen the video of the interview with Danny, you get to see some of that beautiful turquoise that he still has. The next photo is interesting because it shows a woman doing the old-style beads. You know, in China, their tradition with turquoise was really more tied into their love for jade. And they would cut figures. Pre-revolution, it would have been Buddhas and different figures like that. And beads were very important to them. So that's one of the few things they made at the cutting shop before Ron Alexander and Danny built the new modernization of their cutting shop. And they started cutting cabs for export to the US market. Alan's role, primarily because he speaks Chinese, was to be the interpreter. And of course, he became much closer with the Chinese workers because he could talk to them. But these beads are very important, as we're going to see in part 2. It's called the Yungay Temple Mine, and here we see the temple statues that were up the hill. And it's an interesting story in chapter 5 about how Alan and Ron sort of stumbled upon these as they were exploring a little bit. Finally, we see Ron Alexander standing at the entrance to the mine. And keep this in mind, because when we go from then to now, you'll see a real good indication about how much things have changed in China. So I hope you enjoy then and look forward to now.